The stray cat kept scratching the closet. Then a stranger smashed the closet and screamed. What if the hero of the story was the one everyone overlooked? Prepare for a shocking twist in The Shadows of Hemlock Lane, where the truth behind a missing child hinges on the uncanny perception of a stray cat and a secret locked away in an abandoned house. Like, subscribe and listen now to experience the full, unbelievable story. The splintering crack of aged wood was the first sound, sharp and sudden, in the dead air of the storage room. It was followed by a metallic screech as the crowbar bit deeper, prying, straining. Dust, disturbed after years of stillness, billowed out in a choking cloud, catching the weak beam of the flashlight. Then the door, ancient and heavy, groaned open with the reluctance of a tomb. A gasp tore from the repairman's throat, raw and immediate. He stumbled back, the crowbar clattering against the concrete floor. His eyes, wide with a primal terror, were fixed on the black maw of the closet. For a moment, there was only his ragged breathing and the frantic, almost silent scrabbling of the stray cat at his ankles, the same cat that had been clawing at this very spot with an unnerving intensity moments before. He raised a trembling hand, his flashlight beam cutting through the disturbed dust. It landed on a small shape huddled in the far corner, pale, still, too still. Then a flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible movement. He lurched forward, dropping to his knees, the earlier fear replaced by a desperate, surging urgency. "Oh my God!" He choked out the words, a prayer and a curse. "Oh my God, a child!" Inside, amidst the suffocating smell of mildew and fear, a little girl no older than 3, with wide, terrified eyes, stared back. Her face was a pale mask, lips tinged with blue, and a faint, almost inaudible whimper escaped her. He didn't understand. No one had said anything about a child. The work order was for faulty wiring in an old house recently bought by a young family. This was a nightmare. He reached out a shaking hand, his mind reeling 1,000 unformed questions, screaming for answers that weren't there. The world narrowed to that tiny, shivering form, and the deafening silence that pressed in, broken only by the cat's insistent, now almost mournful, meow. The Miller family, David, Sarah, and their energetic 5-year-old son, Leo, had moved to Oak Haven, a sprawling suburb, an hour outside the city, seeking respite from the urban clamor. Their new home on Hemlock Lane was a 2-story Victorian, a fixer-upper, with good bones, as the realtor had cheerfully put it. It had character, a large yard for Leo, and a price tag that didn't completely terrify them. It also had a history they were only beginning to uncover, whispered in the creaks of its floors and the drafts from its ill-fitting windows. The house had stood empty for nearly 3 years before they bought it, a silent sentinel on a street of otherwise well-maintained homes. Their first few weeks were a chaotic symphony of unpacking boxes, painting walls, and discovering the quirks of an old house. A sticky back door, a faucet that dripped with rhythmic precision, and a peculiar chill in the north-facing storage room at the back of the ground floor. It was in this room, crammed with the detritus of previous owners and their own yet-to-be-sorted belongings, that the old wooden closet stood. Dark, imposing, and firmly shut its key. Long lost, it was just another item on their long list of things to eventually deal with. Life in Oak Haven was settling into a pleasant rhythm. David commuted to his architect job. Sarah was a freelance graphic designer working from home, and Leo had already made a friend in Lily, the cheerful 3-year-old from 2 houses down, the daughter of the Peterson family. They were a friendly, outgoing couple, Mark and Jessica Peterson, quick to welcome the Millers to the neighborhood. It was Leo who first befriended the cat. A scrawny, tabby, wary, but with intelligent green eyes, it had started appearing at their back door, a silent observer of their new life. Leo, with the boundless empathy of childhood, had named it Whiskers and started leaving out scraps of food. Slowly, Whiskers had grown bolder, allowing tentative pets, even purring on occasion. Sarah, despite her initial reservations about a stray, found herself growing fond of its quiet presence. They let it sleep on the enclosed porch, a silent guardian against the night. The strangeness began subtly. Whiskers developed an odd fixation with the storage room, specifically with the old wooden closet. At first, it was just a curious sniffing at the base. Then came the soft exploratory scratches. Within a week, it escalated. Every night, as dusk settled, the cat would begin its ritual. It would slip into the storage room, its lithe body a shadow, and begin to scratch at the closet door with a desperate, focused intensity. The sound was unnerving, a rhythmic scritch, scratch, scrape that echoed faintly through the house. Sometimes it would let out low, guttural meows, almost like pleas. "That cat is going to destroy that closet," David had said one evening, frowning at the fresh gouges in the ancient wood. "Maybe there's a mouse in there," Sarah suggested, though she didn't sound convinced. The cat wasn't acting like it was hunting. It was acting like it was trying to excavate something. Leo, ever the animal empath, declared, "Whiskers is trying to tell us something." They tried distracting it, closing the storage room door. But the cat would sit outside meowing pitifully until someone relented. Its persistence was baffling, its distress palpable. The Millers were practical people, not given to flights of fancy, but the cat's behavior was beginning to wear on them, an unspoken tension settling over their new home. The closet, once an inanimate object, started to feel like a brooding presence, its secrets guarded by a frantic four-legged sentinel. The house, their dreams suddenly felt a little less welcoming, holding a secret they hadn't bargained for. The idyllic suburban dream the Millers had envisioned began to fray at the edges, not from any grand disaster, but from the persistent, unnerving scratch of a stray cat. Whiskers' obsession with the storage room closet had transformed from a minor annoyance into a source of genuine concern. The scratching was no longer just at night. It was frequent, frenzied, and accompanied by yowls that sounded less like a cat's typical demands and more like genuine distress. The wood around the closet door was visibly damaged, slivers and dust accumulating on the floor. "This isn't normal," Sarah David said one Saturday morning, coffee cup in hand, staring at the fresh damage. Leo was watching cartoons, oblivious, but the tension was thick enough for both adults to feel. It's not mice. He's trying to get in there. Desperately. Sarah sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, David. It's creepy. What do you think it could be, Old Pipes? Some kind of nest?" She shuddered. "Raccoons?" Maybe, David conceded, though. His gut told him it was something else. The sheer focus of the cat, its almost human-like urgency, was deeply unsettling. He'd tried shooing Whiskers away, even gently placing him outside, but the moment the back door was open, the cat would dart back in, making a beeline for the storage room. The decision to act came less from a single dramatic event and more from an accumulation of unease. The tipping point was an evening when they had guests, old friends from the city. Whiskers had put on a particularly intense performance, his cries echoing through the house, leading to awkward questions and a subtle shared discomfort among their visitors. The house suddenly felt less like a welcoming home and more like a place with a dark, insistent secret. "All right, that's it," David announced the next day, a Sunday. "We need to figure out what's in that closet. It's probably nothing, but this can't go on." His initial goal was simple: solve the mystery of the cat's obsession and hopefully put an end to the nightly disturbances. He imagined finding a trapped squirrel, or perhaps just a very compelling smell that had captivated their feline boarder. His first attempt was straightforward. He jiggled the tarnished brass knob. Locked. He searched the collection of miscellaneous old keys they'd found in a kitchen drawer. None fit. He peered at the lock mechanism. It was old, possibly rusted shut from the inside, or perhaps even bolted. There was no visible external lock suggesting it was secured from within or the mechanism had seized. "It's really stuck," he reported back to Sarah, a new layer of frustration in his voice. "I can't get it open without forcing it, and I don't want to damage it unnecessarily if it's something valuable." Sarah, however, was now more concerned than curious. "David, what if it's something bad, like something died in there?" The thought, though unpleasant, spurred David to a different kind of action. "Okay, new plan. The wiring in that storage room is a mess anyway. I've been meaning to call an electrician to look at it and maybe add an outlet. While he's here, maybe he can take a look at the closet door, see if he has any tools that could get it open without smashing it." He was still hesitant to cause damage, clinging to the hope of a mundane explanation. His reaction was a mixture of annoyance at the situation, a growing unease, fueled by the cat's relentless behavior and the closet's stubborn refusal to yield its secrets, and a practical determination to resolve the issue. He made the call the next morning to a local handyman service, Oak Haven Home Repairs, explaining the need for some electrical work and, almost as an afterthought, mentioning a stuck interior door he might need help with. The dispatcher scheduled a visit for the following afternoon. Unbeknownst to David, this mundane call was the first step towards unraveling a horror far greater than a trapped animal or a forgotten antique. The true inciting incident was not the cat scratching, but their decision to finally heed its warning and force the issue of the closet. Mike Henderson, a man whose weathered face and calloused hands spoke of 20 years in the handyman trade, arrived at the Miller's house promptly at 2 p.m. the next day. He was a local, known for his no-nonsense approach and ability to fix just about anything. David greeted him, explaining the primary task, assessing the old wiring in the storage room and potentially adding an outlet for a small freezer they planned to buy. "And there's this old closet in there," David added, leading Mike towards the back of the house. "The door's stuck fast and our cat has been going nuts trying to get at it. Been scratching it up something fierce. If you have a moment after checking the electrics, maybe you could take a look, see if it can be opened without too much fuss." As if on cue, Whiskers, who had been warily observing Mike from the kitchen doorway, streaked past them into the storage room. The cat immediately went to the closet, sniffing intently at the base, then began to scratch with renewed vigor, letting out a low, urgent yowl. Mike watched the cat for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable in his eyes. "Huh, persistent little fella, ain't he?" He set his toolbox down with a thud. "Let's see about that wiring first, then we'll tackle your mystery closet." The storage room was cool and dimly lit, the single bare bulb casting long dancing shadows. It was cluttered with the miller's unpacked boxes and a few forgotten remnants from the previous occupants. A dusty trunk, a broken floor lamp, and the imposing wooden closet itself. Mike got to work, examining the ancient cloth-covered wiring, muttering about fire hazards and outdated panels. David hovered nearby, half listening, his attention repeatedly drawn to Whiskers, who was now pacing agitatedly in front of the closet, occasionally batting at the door with a paw. After about an hour, Mike straightened up. "Yeah, this wiring is shot. Definitely needs replacing. Not a huge job, but it needs doing. I can draw up a quote for you." "Thanks, Mike," David said. "Appreciate it. Now about that closet." Mike picked up his flashlight and approached the closet, Whiskers weaving around his ankles. He ran his hand over the wood, examining the frame. No external lock. Must be an internal mechanism, or it's just swollen shut over time. "You try the knob." "Yeah, it's seized up tight," David replied. "Won't budge." Mike shone his light along the narrow gap between the door and the frame. "Can't see much. Looks like it's been closed a long, long time." He pushed against it, then tried to rattle it. Solid. "You really want this open?" David hesitated for a beat. The cat's insistent cries, the unsettling feeling the closet emanated. "Yeah," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "Yeah, I do. We need to know what's got him so worked up." "All right," Mike said, heading back to his toolbox. "Gentle persuasion might not cut it. You okay if I have to use a bit of force, might scratch the paint or the wood?" "At this point, I think the cat's done more damage than you could," David said with a wry smile, though the knot in his stomach tightened. Mike returned with a heavy-duty flashlight and a sturdy crowbar. The sight of the tool made the situation feel suddenly more serious. This wasn't just a stuck door anymore. It was an obstacle to be overcome. Whiskers, sensing a change in momentum, sat back on his haunches, watching intently, his green eyes fixed on the closet. Mike positioned the tip of the crowbar in the slight gap near where a latch might be. "Stand back a bit," he advised. He applied pressure. The wood groaned. He repositioned, tried again. A small splinter of wood popped off. He grunted with effort. The air grew thick with anticipation. The only sounds were Mike's strained breathing, the creak of stressed wood, and the almost silent, intense focus of the cat. Each attempt to pry the door open was a small escalation. The initial plan to simply see what's inside was morphing into a minor siege. Complications arose not from external antagonists, but from the stubbornness of the old house itself and the growing psychological weight of the mystery. What if it was something awful? What if opening it unleashed something they weren't prepared for? Sarah had come to the doorway, drawn by the sounds, her face pale. Leo was with her, his eyes wide. "Maybe we should just leave it." "David!" Sarah whispered, a tremor in her voice. But they were too far in now. The cat's relentless obsession, the locked door, the house's silent history, it all pointed to something that needed to be brought into the light. Mike gritted his teeth, sweat beading on his forehead. Almost there. With a final forceful heave, Mike threw his weight against the crowbar. There was a sharp, violent crack as the internal latch or bolt, rusted and weakened by time, finally surrendered. The sound echoed through the storage room like a gunshot. The ancient wooden door, free for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, swung inward with a protesting groan, releasing a gust of stale, musty air that carried with it an undertone of something else, something sickeningly sweet and acrid. Dust billowed thick and choking, momentarily obscuring the view. Whiskers, who had been a coiled spring of anticipation, darted forward before anyone could react, disappearing into the blackness of the opened closet. "Whiskers, no!" Leo cried out, trying to follow, but Sarah held him back, her grip tight on his small shoulder. Mike, recovering his balance, coughed, waving a hand in front of his face to clear the airborne particles. He stepped towards the opening, his heavy-duty flashlight cutting a bright swathe through the gloom. David was right behind him, heart hammering against his ribs, a sense of profound dread mixing with a desperate need to know. The beam landed first on Whiskers, who was nuzzling something in the far corner, a low rumbling purr emanating from his small body, a sound starkly different from his earlier frantic cries. And then the light moved slightly, illuminating what the cat was so intently focused on. The gasp from Mike was sharp, a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. David felt the air leave his own lungs, his mind struggling to process the impossible sight before him. Sarah stifled a scream, her hand flying to her mouth, her eyes wide with horror. Huddled in the back of the deep closet amidst a pile of old moth-eaten linens was a small child, a little girl. She was curled into a fetal position, her clothes soiled, her face pale and smudged with dirt. Her eyes were open, but they were dull, vacant, staring into nothingness. For a terrifying second, David thought she was dead. Then her chest gave a tiny, shuddering heave, a faint, almost inaudible whimper, like the cry of a trapped bird, escaped her chapped lips. "Oh my God!" Mike breathed, his voice hoarse with disbelief. He stumbled back a step, nearly tripping over his crowbar. It's a kid. There's a kid in there." David was frozen for a moment, his world tilting on its axis. The cat's strange behavior, the locked closet, it all snapped into a horrifying, unbelievable focus. This wasn't a trapped animal. This wasn't old, forgotten belongings. This was a child, a living, breathing child entombed in the darkness. The shock acted like a defibrillator, jolting him into action. "Sarah, call 911 now," he yelled, his voice cracking. He pushed past Mike, dropping to his knees at the closet opening. The stench of urine and fear was overpowering. "Hey," he said softly, his voice trembling. "Hey there, little one. We're here. You're safe now." The little girl didn't respond, didn't even seem to register his presence. Her eyes remained unfocused. Whiskers, however, looked up at David, meowed once, then rubbed his head against the child's limp arm. This was the turning point. The mystery of the closet was solved, but in its place was a far more terrible reality. Their ordinary world, their quiet suburban life, had been irrevocably breached. From this moment on, they were no longer just a family renovating an old house. They were witnesses, rescuers thrust into the heart of a nightmare. The initial goal of satisfying curiosity was obliterated, replaced by the urgent, overwhelming need to save this child and understand how such an atrocity could have happened in their home, right under their noses, its silent horror, revealed only by the instinct of a stray cat. There was no going back to the mundane. The shadows of Hemlock Lane had just revealed their darkest secret. The wail of sirens, distant at first, then rapidly growing closer, sliced through the stunned silence that had enveloped Hemlock Lane. Sarah's voice on the phone with the 911 dispatcher had been remarkably calm, a stark contrast to the turmoil raging inside her. But now, as the reality of flashing lights and official vehicles descending on their quiet street began, tremors ran through her. David remained by the closet, speaking softly to the little girl who still hadn't moved or made a sound beyond those initial whimpers. Whiskers stayed with her, a furry, purring sentinel. Paramedics were the first through the door, their movements swift and professional. They gently eased the child from the closet, their faces grim as they took in her condition: dehydration, malnutrition, extreme lethargy. "She's alive, but barely," one of them muttered quickly, assessing her vitals. As they carried her out on a small stretcher, a tiny, almost skeletal figure lost in blankets. A collective gasp went through the small crowd of neighbors that had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Then came the police. Officers secured the scene, their questions initially directed at a still reeling David and Sarah. "How long have you lived here? When did you find her? Did you see anything suspicious?" The storage room. Their house suddenly felt like a crime scene, violated and alien. They recounted the story of the cat, its inexplicable obsession with the closet, a detail that was met with looks ranging from polite skepticism to outright disbelief from some of the uniformed officers. Detective Harding, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, arrived shortly after. She listened to their story again, more intently this time, particularly the part about Whiskers. "The cat," she mused, looking at the tabby, who was now sitting calmly by the empty closet, occasionally grooming a paw. "Animals sense things?" The immediate fallout was a whirlwind of activity and emotion. Child Protective Services were notified. The little girl, whose identity was still unknown, was rushed to Oak Haven General. David and Sarah gave their statements over and over, each retelling solidifying the horror in their minds. Leo, confused and scared, clung to Sarah, asking where the little girl had come from and why she was so sick. It was later that evening, after the initial wave of police had receded, leaving only a single cruiser parked outside, that the first piece of the puzzle fell into place. Detective Harding returned. "We think we know who she is," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "There's a missing child report, filed 2 days ago. Lily Peterson, 3 years old, lives 2 doors down." The words hit David and Sarah like a physical blow. Lily, the sweet, giggling toddler Leo played with, the daughter of Mark and Jessica, their friendly neighbors. The Petersons had been frantic searching, posting flyers. And all this time, Lily had been just a few hundred feet away, trapped alone. The guilt was a crushing weight. How could they not have known? The house was empty before you moved in, right? Harding continued. "The Petersons said they searched the yard of this place, but didn't think to try and get inside, figured it was locked up tight, abandoned." Sarah remembered something then, a detail so small it had barely registered. "The cat," she whispered, her eyes wide. "Whiskers. Lily used to feed him. When he first started showing up in the neighborhood, before we really took him in, Leo told me Lily would sneak him bits of her sandwich when she played in her yard." Detective Harding looked at Whiskers, who was now curled up on the rug, seemingly oblivious. "A familiar scent," she murmured, "and he must have heard her. Cries too faint for human ears, perhaps." The cat's strange behavior, its desperate scratching, suddenly transformed from a bizarre obsession into a heroic, heartbreaking attempt to communicate the unthinkable. The Millers' world had been turned upside down. Their new home was now the center of a major criminal investigation. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old house sounded sinister. Their initial plan to simply renovate and settle in was gone, replaced by a need for answers, for justice for Lily. They were no longer just bystanders. They were intrinsically linked to this tragedy. The police began exploring kidnapping theories. Who would do this, and why this house? The fear that the perpetrator might still be in the area, or worse, someone they knew, was a cold knot in their stomachs. Their regrouping was less a conscious plan and more a dazed processing of trauma, a clinging to each other as they navigated the shockwaves with the silent, unassuming stray cat, now revealed as the unlikely key to Lily's survival. The days following Lily Peterson's discovery were a blur of police activity, media attention, and a pervasive sense of unease that settled over Oak Haven. Hemlock Lane, once a picture of suburban tranquility, was now under a microscope. News vans parked down the street, their satellite dishes aimed like accusing fingers. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones, casting suspicious glances. The fabric of their close-knit community suddenly frayed. For the Millers, their home remained a focal point of the investigation. Detectives combed every inch of the house and yard, searching for any clue the kidnapper might have left behind. David and Sarah were interviewed repeatedly, their memories probed for any detail, no matter how insignificant that might help. The old closet in the storage room, now sealed with police tape, was a constant grim reminder of what had happened within its confines. Whiskers, oblivious to his newfound local fame as the hero cat, mostly slept, though he'd occasionally visit the storage room door and meow softly as if checking. The investigation, led by Detective Harding, quickly focused on how Lily had ended up in the closet of a house that had been vacant until the Millers moved in just weeks before. The theory was that the kidnapper had used the empty house as a temporary hiding spot, intending to move her or make a ransom demand, but had perhaps been spooked. The fact that the Millers started moving in might have accelerated the kidnapper's panic, leading them to abandon Lily. Security footage from a gas station on the main road leading out of Oak Haven provided the first significant break. A grainy image captured a man purchasing a child's juice box and a candy bar around the time Lily went missing. He looked nervous, furtive. Separately, a neighbor of the Petersons recalled seeing an unfamiliar van parked on a side street the day Lily disappeared. The descriptions, though vague, began to coalesce. The pressure mounted. Lily was recovering in the hospital, weak but alive, though deeply traumatized. Her parents, Mark and Jessica, were a wreck of emotions. Immense relief at her survival, fury at her abductor, and a profound gratitude towards the Millers and, unbelievably, their cat. They visited the Millers' tears, streaming, offering thanks that felt inadequate for the life of their child. That cat, Mark had said, his voice thick with emotion, looking at Whiskers, he's a guardian angel. For David and Sarah, the final tests were less about physical danger and more about emotional and psychological endurance. The media attention was intrusive. Sleep offered little respite, their dreams haunted by the image of Lily in the closet. There was also a creeping fear. Was the kidnapper someone local? Someone who knew the neighborhood, knew the house was empty? The sense of safety in their new home, their new town, was shattered. David found himself double-checking locks, peering out of windows at night. Sarah felt a constant urge to keep Leo within arm's reach. Detective Harding, meanwhile, was methodically piecing together the evidence. The man from the gas station footage was eventually identified through facial recognition software cross-referenced with recent paroles, a low-level criminal named Arthur Jennings, with a history of petty theft and a prior unrelated arrest for stalking. His last known address was a transient motel 2 towns over. He had no apparent connection to the Petersons, suggesting Lily might have been a crime of opportunity. The climax was approaching not with a bang, but with the relentless click of investigative pieces falling into place. The police learned Jennings had briefly worked for a landscaping company that had ironically quoted a job for the previous owners of the Hemlock Lane house a year prior, meaning he might have known it was vacant and its layout. One evening, Detective Harding called David. "We have a strong lead on Jennings. We think we know where he might be holed up. We're preparing to move in." There was a tension in her voice that spoke of imminent action. For the Millers and for Oak Haven, the waiting was almost unbearable. They needed this to be over for the shadow to be lifted. The community held its breath, hoping for an arrest, for a return to some semblance of normalcy, all the while marveling at the quiet stray cat whose instincts had pierced the darkness. The address for Arthur Jennings wasn't a dilapidated hideout or a shadowy underworld den. It was a small, unassuming apartment in a rundown complex on the outskirts of the neighboring county, a place where people kept to themselves and asked few questions. Detective Harding, along with a tactical team, converged on the location just as dawn was breaking the gray light, lending a grim hue to the peeling paint of the building. There was no dramatic shootout, no prolonged standoff. Jennings, it turned out, was not a criminal mastermind, but a desperate, inept man caught in a situation far beyond his control. Alerted by a neighbor who recognized his picture from a news broadcast shared on social media, local police had put the building under surveillance. When the tactical team announced their presence, a brief, panicked scuffling was heard from inside Jennings's ground floor apartment. He made a clumsy attempt to flee through a back window, but was quickly apprehended by officers covering the perimeter. He offered no resistance, his face a mask of defeated resignation. He was disheveled, looking like he hadn't slept in days, the weight of his crime clearly visible. Inside the sparsely furnished apartment, detectives found Lily's backpack, discarded in a corner. They also found notes hastily scribbled, revealing a half-baked plan to demand a small ransom from the Petersons, a plan he'd evidently abandoned when he realized the Millers were moving into the Hemlock Lane house, fearing discovery. He confessed quickly, detailing how he'd seen Lily playing in her yard, impulsively snatched her and hidden her in the closet of the vacant house he knew about, intending to come back for her later. He claimed he'd panicked when he saw activity at the house sooner than expected and fled, leaving Lily locked inside, a chilling admission of his reckless cruelty. For David and Sarah, the news of Jennings' arrest, delivered via a call from Detective Harding, brought an immense, complicated wave of relief. It wasn't triumph, but a heavy, weary sense of an ordeal finally reaching its end. The direct confrontation had been between law enforcement and the criminal, but the Millers, the Petersons and little Lily, had been at the heart of the battle, their lives irrevocably impacted. The true climax for them had been the opening of that closet door. This was the necessary, painful conclusion to the horror it had revealed. The monster was caught not by their hands, but because a chain of events, starting with a cat's instinct, had brought his actions into the light. In the weeks that followed Arthur Jennings' arrest, a semblance of normalcy began to return to Hemlock Lane, though it was a new normal forever tinged by the events that had transpired. Jennings faced a slew of charges, including kidnapping and child endangerment, and the legal process, though slow, was moving towards a conviction that would see him imprisoned for a very long time. The media vans eventually departed, finding new stories to chase, leaving Oak Haven to begin its healing. Lily Peterson made a full physical recovery. The psychological scars her parents knew would take much longer to fade, but she was a resilient child. She slowly began to smile again, to play, though she remained wary of strangers and confined spaces. Her first outing after returning from the hospital was to the Miller's house. Not to the storage room, but to their backyard, where she sat with Leo sharing cookies, and with Whiskers. She shyly reached out and stroked the tabby's soft fur, a small, genuine smile gracing her lips when he purred and rubbed against her hand. The Millers made a decision that surprised no one who knew them or had followed the story. Whiskers was no longer a stray they were merely tolerating. He was family. They officially adopted him, and Leo, with grave seriousness, suggested a new name, Guardian. It stuck. Guardian, the silent protector, now had a permanent, loving home, his days of scavenging over. He remained a quiet, unassuming cat, but to the Millers and the Petersons, he was a hero. The story of Guardian and Lily spread far beyond Oak Haven, a testament to the unexpected courage and perception of an animal, and a reminder of the fragility of safety and the strength of community. The photo of Lily, a little pale but smiling, hugging Guardian as her parents prepared to take her home from her first visit back to the Millers, did indeed go viral, a beacon of hope after a dark ordeal. The Millers continued with their renovations, but the storage room closet remained. They cleaned it thoroughly, painted it a cheerful yellow, and installed a sturdy new lock on the outside. For a long time, they couldn't bring themselves to store anything in it. It was a reminder not just of the horror, but also of the incredible series of events that led to Lily's rescue. Life on Hemlock Lane settled. Children's laughter once again echoed in the yards, the fear slowly receding, replaced by a heightened sense of vigilance and a deeper appreciation for the quiet bravery that could be found in the most unexpected of places, even in the persistent scratching of a little stray cat who remembered a kindness